It's the end of the Bronze Age, roughly 1200 to 1150 BC. The greatest civilizations the world had ever known are collapsing in a cascade of fire and chaos that still baffles historians today. The mighty Mycenaean palaces of Greece, including the legendary citadel of Agamemnon at Mycenae, lie in smoking ruins. The vast Hittite Empire, whose capital Hattusa in central Anatolia was once a superpower controlling trade across the Near East, is utterly destroyed, its archives buried under layers of ash. The opulent port cities of the Levant, such as Ugarit, fall silent forever, their final clay tablets describing desperate pleas for help that never arrived. Trade routes that had linked the entire known world for centuries suddenly die. Entire peoples vanish into legend, their sophisticated palace economies wiped out almost overnight. And out of this apocalyptic twilight sails a small fleet of Trojan refugees, survivors of the legendary sack of Troy, led by a man whose bloodline would one day name an entire island, Britain. His name was Brutus, and this is his story. One of the most astonishing, yet strangely forgotten chapters in human history, bridging the glittering, interconnected world of the late Bronze Age with the rugged new nations of the Iron Age. According to the ancient British chronicles that have survived, Brutus was the great-grandson of the legendary Aeneas, the Trojan prince immortalized in Homer's Iliad and Virgil's Aeneid as the hero who escaped the burning walls of Troy, carrying his father Anchises on his back and the sacred Palladium of the gods. Aeneas fled to Italy, founded the line that would birth Rome, and from his son Ascanius came Silvius, whose own son was Brutus. The tale first surfaces in the 9th century Historia Brittonum, attributed to the Welsh monk Nennius, who compiled earlier oral traditions, and was later expanded into a full epic narrative by Geoffrey of Monmouth in his 12th century Historia Regum Britannia, the very book that shaped medieval views of British kingship, and gave the world the earliest stories of King Arthur. Brutus's life began in tragedy. While still a young prince in the royal house of Alba Longa in Italy, he accidentally killed his own father, Silvius, with a misfired arrow during a hunting expedition in the forests. Overwhelmed by guilt and exiled by his grandfather, he wandered the Mediterranean as a fugitive warrior. In a sacred temple, the goddess Diana appeared to him in a prophetic dream. Brutus, beyond the setting of the sun, in the Western Ocean, lies an island once inhabited by giants. There your descendants shall found a second Troy, greater than the first, and your line shall rule over many nations. Heeding the oracle, he gathered a band of fellow Trojan exiles who had been enslaved in Greece, liberated them by defeating the tyrannical king Pandrasus in battle, then sailed onward through Spain and the forests of Gaul, fighting local kings and forging alliances, until at last his ships sighted the white cliffs of Albion, the ancient, fog-shrouded name for Britain. Albion was a wild, primeval land, still recovering from the Bronze Age upheavals, sparsely populated and ruled only by a race of giants descended, according to the chronicles, from the biblical Nephilim or the corrupted offspring of earlier settlers. Brutus and his champion Corineus, a mighty wrestler of Trojan blood, confronted these colossal beings. The most fearsome was Gog-Magog, a giant said to stand 12 cubits tall who terrorized the coasts. In a legendary single combat on the cliffs of Cornwall, Corineus hurled Gog-Magog into the sea, where the giant's body smashed against the rocks below, giving that headland its ancient name. With the giants defeated, some accounts say there were 24 in total. Brutus claimed the island as his own. Victorious, he renamed it Britain after himself, fulfilling Diana's prophecy. He founded the city of Trinovantum, New Troy, on the banks of the river Thames, laying out its streets in imitation of the sacred plan of old Troy and building temples to the gods who had guided him. Today we call that city London, and its ancient heart still echoes the name Troia Nova. Brutus divided the newly won land among his 3 sons. Locrinus received the central realm that became England, or Loegria. Albanactus took the northern territories that became Scotland, or Albany, and Camber claimed the western hills that became Wales, or Cambria. From this single act of division, every subsequent British king could legitimately trace his royal bloodline directly back to Trojan nobility, creating an unbroken chain of legitimacy that medieval monarchs proudly invoked for centuries. But the story goes even deeper into the myths of antiquity. Medieval chroniclers, eager to reconcile pagan legends with biblical truth, traced the entire Trojan royal house all the way back to Noah and the survivors of the Great Flood. In the genealogies preserved alongside Geoffrey's work, and later expanded by writers such as Ranulph Higden and the Scottish chroniclers, the line runs through Dardanus, the mythical founder of Troy, who was said to descend from Noah's son Japheth, the ancestor of the Indo-European peoples, though some variant traditions linked it through Ham to emphasize the scattering of nations after the Tower of Babel. Brutus, therefore, was not merely a founder of Britain. He was the living bridge between the antediluvian world of Genesis and the emerging Iron Age nations of Europe, carrying the blood of the flood survivor across the waves to plant a new civilization. And Britain itself was never some remote, isolated backwater during the Bronze Age. Long before Brutus's fleet arrived, the island was the beating heart of a truly global trade network that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Baltic. Its rich tin mines in Cornwall and Devon supplied the essential ingredient for bronze, the alloy that armed empires and built tools across the known world. Without British tin, bronze simply could not be made at scale. Modern science has now proven the connection beyond doubt. A groundbreaking 2025 study from Durham University used advanced lead isotope analysis to confirm that tin ingots recovered from multiple 14th and 13th century BC shipwrecks off the coast of Israel and in the eastern Mediterranean originated directly from Cornish ore deposits. Phoenician and Mycenaean traders, or their intermediaries, crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in sophisticated vessels, exchanging luxury goods, amber, and copper for this precious British tin. Centuries before Brutus supposedly set foot on Albion, the island was already plugged directly into the sophisticated Old World economy, its mines fueling the very Bronze Age civilizations that would soon collapse. Segment 5. Then came the catastrophe that changed everything. Around the very time Troy fell, traditionally dated to about 1180 BC, the entire Bronze Age system imploded in what scholars call the Late Bronze Age collapse, one of the most mysterious and cataclysmic phases in all of human history. In the space of just a few decades, empires that had endured for centuries crumbled into dust. The Mycenaean kingdoms vanished, their linear B writing system forgotten for 400 years. The Hittite Empire disintegrated, its vassal states rebelling and its capital abandoned. Levantine cities were sacked, their populations scattered. Trade networks that had carried tin from Britain, copper from Cyprus, and ivory from Africa simply evaporated. Writing nearly disappeared outside Egypt and Mesopotamia. Millions of people were displaced, forming new tribal confederations and migrating en masse. New, smaller, tougher nations rose from the ruins. The early Philistines, the resurgent Phoenicians, the Sea Peoples raiders recorded by Pharaoh Ramses III, and yes, the emerging Britons under Brutus. These Iron Age societies were innovative, forging stronger weapons from abundant iron ore and embracing more localized, resilient economies. Yet they paled dramatically in comparison to the glittering, highly centralized palace civilizations that had come before, those superpowers with vast bureaucracies, international diplomacy, and global supply chains that made the Bronze Age feel almost modern. How could such advanced, interconnected societies collapse so rapidly and disperse so completely? Historians and archaeologists still debate the exact mix. Prolonged climate change, triggering devastating droughts and famines, massive earthquakes that toppled palaces, internal peasant revolts against corrupt elites, and the relentless invasions of the enigmatic Sea Peoples whose origins remain unknown. No single cause explains it all. It remains archaeology's greatest unsolved mystery, a warning from the past about how even the mightiest systems can unravel when multiple pressures strike at once. And here's where legend meets cold, carved stone in a way that still sends shivers down the spine. The Picts of Scotland, known in ancient Irish annals as the Cruithne, left behind hundreds of mysterious symbol stones that whisper of their origins across the sea. Among the most striking recurring motifs is the hippocampus, the mythical seahorse, with its coiled tail and equine head, carved into slabs, like the famous Aberlemno stone and others across Pickland. This exact creature appears as a heraldic crest on Phrygian bronze helmets and warrior gear excavated from western Anatolia, the very heartland of Troy. The Carian people, fierce seafaring allies of the Trojans described by Homer in the Iliad as helmet-crested warriors from the rugged coasts of Asia Minor, lived in that same corner of the ancient world. Their distinctive crested helmets and maritime symbols match the Pictish carvings with uncanny precision, suggesting that bands of Carian or Phrygian refugees may have sailed westward with the Trojans and mingled with the local Bronze Age population of the British Isles. Even the spiritual world points to a profound connection. The Phrygians of the Trojan homeland worshipped the great mother goddess Cybele and her tragic lover Attis in rites of astonishing intensity. Sacred groves where ecstatic dances and prophetic oracles took place, ritual self-sacrifice and castration among Attis's followers, mystery initiations that promised rebirth, and hymns sung to the Earth Mother beneath ancient trees. These practices echo with startling clarity in the Druidic cults that dominated Britain and Ireland. The Druids revered sacred oak groves as living temples, practiced prophetic divination through bardic seers, conducted ritual sacrifices for the land's fertility, and maintained oral mystery traditions that bound the people to the Earth Mother. The cult of the Sibyl, the divinely inspired prophetess whose utterances guided kings, also finds parallels in both Phrygian oracles and the visionary women among the early Celtic Druids. Were the Druids preserving fragments of an older Anatolian mystery tradition carried across the waves by Trojan and Phrygian exiles? The parallels in ritual, sacred landscape, and prophetic ecstasy are too numerous and too precise to dismiss as mere coincidence. So when you stand on the wind-swept cliffs of Dover, walk the ancient streets of London, or gaze upon the weathered Pictish stones in a Scottish field, remember this: beneath the surface lies the blood, the dreams, and the enduring legacy of Brutus of Troy, a man who sailed out of the ashes of the Bronze Age collapse, who defeated giants, founded a city that would become a world capital, and planted the seed of a nation that helped birth the Iron Age world we still inhabit today. Britain wasn't discovered by chance. It was deliberately founded by refugees who refused to let their ancient civilization die. And that is a story worth remembering.